Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Get Down. Today we have the amazing woman from the Merp team, and we'll be talking all about equity and then what, bridging the gap, the cannabis industry, and Black women in tech.
Merp is a cannabis marketplace site focused not just on products that they list on their Instagrams, but also the experiences, people, and equity measures surrounding them. So give it up for these ladies.
Hi, my name is Simone Varnado. I am the founder of Merp, she, her.
Hi, I'm Kyra Horton. I am the COO of Merp, she, her.
So we are super excited to have you guys on Vintage today, and we really just want to get started with, when did you decide that Merp was something you wanted to do, especially you, Simone? When did you come up with the idea and really said, okay, I'm going to, take actionable steps to make this a reality?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2019, so before the panoramic. And when I graduated, I already had this like fascination interest within like the emerging legal cannabis marketplace and like legal cannabis as a whole industry. So I started looking around to see, where could I take some of my skills from my prior work experience and apply them to the cannabis space. And when I constantly kept being confronted with and seeing was that a lot of CEOs and people who were the major like players and controllers in this industry were mostly cishet white men from Wall Street. And it really bothered me because I studied sociology. I researched, black market drugs, drug sites. So I was very aware with like the criminalization aspect of cannabis and who had paid the cost for that and blood, sweat, tears, and years. And it wasn't these men. The men didn't look like them. So with that being said, I started to look at, equity efforts and seeing what people were doing to like, really speak to the root issues that were affecting the people who, prior to legalization were arrested and incarcerated for this and had their lives and communities destroyed. And most of it was just, the word equity was said, but there was nothing else mentioned afterwards. Or if it was sort of quid pro quo. So I decided, I want to start a cannabis company that, first of all, people at the top of that company look like the people who were affected and have people who were affected by this industry. So a direct personal connection, but also be a company that leads the charge and talking to communities, talking to organizers, talking to people to figure out what are the root issues here and how do we best, discuss this and also speak to this and really get to some healing, some transformative justice.
I like what you said in regards to why you wanted to start it as well. I remember my senior year of high school, I actually indulged in a research paper where it basically spoke about Black and brown people being incarcerated for the use of cannabis. And I'll use the proper terms for cannabis just because I feel like when you hear different words, that associate with cannabis is always used in a negative connotation, or there's always a stigma surrounding it of, oh, that's a gateway drug that it's used to essentially caused your downfall or something, or they associate it with Black and brown individuals in low income communities. So I would like to ask you, like, why did you feel like it was important for you as a Black woman in America, and especially with everything that that's going on right now, for you to basically touch upon these topics? And a lot of people always think that cannabis is something that is surrounding the white man, and like you said, you're seeing all these CEOs and they're the ones profiting off of these Black and brown bodies going into jail for having an ounce or having a little cannabis on them. So can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so being an organizer is part of kind of who I've always been. So, the social justice, social activism piece of this is not new to me. I'm true that it's not new to this. So like that part right there was not new to me. That was already who I am. And like any work that I do, I'm bringing it to my job, bringing it to the work that I'm in, the space that I'm in. And so that part wasn't new, but in cannabis, I thought it was even more important. And as a Black woman, people always ask questions more like, why you? And it doesn't have to be me. It never had to be me, but no one was doing it. And if somebody was, I wouldn't have a company, but because somebody was, that left, you know, the space, opportunity, the need that needed to be filled kind of there. And so that's what, you know, that's where Merp kind of grew out of. It's just that seeing that need and seeing that, seeing where were the gaps as far as products too. Like, you know, they had this idea of, you know, kind of what I want to do as a mission, but also, you know, as CEO, as an entrepreneur, I have to have a product. You know, I have to have a product that people want to use to be able to get these things accomplished. You know, at the end of the day, I'm still, you know, involved in the form of capitalism. And that's just I'm keeping it in a buck right there. So that was why I did this company. I went the tech route more so. Kairos, that was a opportunity where in any industry, tech is going to be there. So figuring out how tech and cannabis come together, and then figuring out how do we fill that space and what product was where kind of Merp grew up more precisely.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So that was so amazing. Thank you so much, Simone. I really want to talk about, you know, the personal aspect of how these things affect our communities, especially the cannabis industry as a whole, because we know that, you know, there are millions of people that are incarcerated because of this. Now legislation is passing to legalize it. So Kyra, I really want to know, you know, like what started your involvement in Merp? Were there any personal ties? Were there any other convictions that is part of, like, you know, like this narrative of, you know, working for Merp, the work that Merp does, and reevaluating this idea of transformation and reformation around these things in a new way?
So I got involved with Merp. It was during the summer, the pandemic happened, and I was working as an account analyst for a telecommunications company. And you know, I'm a Black woman, and we survive, we thrive. So I decided I was going to get my project management license, and I was helping one of my mentors. We were doing a financial literacy piece for BIPOC people, and then Simone started talking to me about her idea for Merp. And I was like, well, I took the time to educate myself, and this is my best friend. And throughout my time, as she says, no, new to this, not new to this, true to this. And this is I've always been a part of mentoring and helping people build themselves to their greatest point and their greatest potential. And Simone's one of my best friends. So I wanted to be on this journey with her and to see her dream come to fruition. So we've been on, you know, on this roller coaster. And my conviction that comes about is that, you know, I'm a multicultural Black person. My mom immigrated from Jamaica. My grandma, you know, was born sharecropping in the Mississippi. And my father was from Boston, and he was in jail for 20 years. I'm 24. And it was in the mix of drugs. He wasn't a drug participant, but the person that he was in conflict with was. And I think there's the notion that we don't fully understand what drugs, the criminalization of drugs, and in this point, cannabis has done to our communities, especially if it doesn't have to directly affect you. So for me, my father wasn't a drug participant, but the person who's in conflict with was. Or we think of our communities, people who have mental health illnesses or physical illnesses, and they don't have access to, you know, the hospitals, the doctors, treatment. They have found their way to cannabis to relieve some stress, to be able to cope with their lives, and they get caught up with the system. Or you get caught up because you're just trying to make a way for your family. And then you have these whole communities that are surrounded with different issues that do touch cannabis. And I think the average person who's looking at the cannabis industry doesn't fully understand that. Not everyone has to touch the drug. You know, it's just one person has depression and cannabis gets them through it. Grandma, you know, needs some help with her arthritis. It helps her get through it. You know, someone is fighting for resources in their community that has been sucked dry. And, you know, they end up, you know, messing with someone who is in cannabis, and that drags them along with it. So I think, you know, we all have to open our minds to how our communities has been formed from the criminalization of cannabis and the drug industry as in totality.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I also, touching on what Grace had basically said about all these new states basically passing these legislations of, you know, involving cannabis within their states and things like that. How do you think that affects the people who are already incarcerated for the use of cannabis, and these legislations basically still being passed? And like you guys said, again, the white man basically profiting again off of this probably multi-billion dollar corporation that has to do with cannabis.
Well, I would say it's not like it's a possible. The drug industry is $1 billion. The drug industry has gotten America through depressions. So we need to just acknowledge that. And I think it's crazy that it is being legalized slowly but surely. But obviously, people who are in jail for nonviolent drug convictions are not really seeing that, reflect in their lives. And I think people have this notion that once it's legalized, it's just a kind of a rollout, when it's not. I mean, people understand the resources that need to be involved. Access to family members, access to lawyers. Is your lawyer going to work pro bono or not? Do you have to pay them retroactively? What's the education after being released from jail? I mean, I know my father went through a halfway house, and being acclimated to being a provider for yourself and the family you may or may not have. And so I think the journey is not fully explained when we talk about legalizing cannabis.
I think to piggyback off of that point, there in one thing we make a conscious effort of educating. So we look at where are taxes going in each state, where we know, and some states the taxes are going back to police, and so we have our own opinion about that. We can talk about that later if you want to, but so some of these states you have to really track also where the money is going for the cannabis industry. And as Kyra mentioned, when these people are, first of all, just because it's legal doesn't mean the people who are incarcerated for it automatically let out. That is not true. That is not true for all states or even most states. And also sometimes it's expensive and a long time and a complicated process to get that expunged. So sometimes you can get that expunged if you were incarcerated for a non-violent drug offense related to cannabis, but it could be a long, expensive process that makes it so people just are like, you know what, I don't even want to deal with this. And so then it still affects their lives. And we do a whole series on Instagram and our social media around barriers to entry. And so when we talk about, these states trying to enact equity measures that speak to people who are directly affected, who've been incarcerated, first of all, we have to look at wealth. A lot of these people who are targeted, who are incarcerated, most people who are targeted and incarcerated are usually low-income people. Most people in prisons are low income, and for marijuana, most of them are Black and brown. And so they already come from a low socioeconomic background, with little wealth, and that selling marijuana or picking in drugs. And I think part of the thing of doing drugs in some cases is it numbs the pain, it numbs the realities of capitalism. But outside of just that, so these people go into the system, already with little wealth, and they go into prisons, aren't not paid particularly well or even at all, and they get out and they don't have any wealth usually accumulated. They have not having opportunities to grow themselves financially or even personally in these facilities, and they get out and they are expected to be able to afford a $3,000 application fee and a $10,000 application license for to run a dispensary or process cannabis. That is just you can't expect people. The average cost to open a dispensary, one single dispensary with all the costs involved, is $300,000 usually. And so that's on average, but for one single standalone, or actually no, 150, I think 150,000. I'm mixing the numbers here, but still 6 figures. Either way, 6 figures. And if you are incarcerated, if already from low economic background, come into out of prison, and then you have to get expunged to be able to engage in this market. So you have to get expunged, and that's a process involved in that. If it's not a pro bono lawyer, as Kyra mentioned, and then find the cost to start the dispensary when the community you come from don't already have the wealth or the resources to be able to even pull funds together to afford that kind of thing. And that's just the startup cost, not the cost to keep it going for the first year. So all these things are things that we think about when we talk about, efforts being done or what isn't being done, about people who've been incarcerated. So all things that come into play, and there are plenty more, but these are just a few that come to my mind initially.
And I don't even think that people really realize the extent to these things. And so when we really think about equity and the work that Merp is doing to bridge the gap, what do you guys what do you think characterizes that? Looking at this next year, as you begin to roll out, as you begin to gain more attention and really build yourselves in this industry, versus 5-10 years from now, what do you really want to see? What are we demanding from this industry?
Yeah. Well, one thing we always acknowledge on our social media platforms, everything we talk about equity, is that there is not a one size fits all model for even community, even in the same state. And so we acknowledge that there is not going to be one kind of model nationally that is going to fit every single circumstance. But however, there are consistent, there are some consistencies there with lack of resources, lack of social capital, as well as academic capital. So I think that one thing that we would like to see is that the cannabis industry as a whole come together as an industry and have a fund or pool to be able to, you know, directly that people who've been incarcerated can go to apply and say, hey, this is like, you know, this I just got released, or this is my background, and you know, you all have this